project, we're going to create an application that allows the user to enter a phrase or a sentence or a word or a number and test to see if it's a palindrome. What's a palindrome? Palindrome is a word, phrase, number, or sequence of words that reads the same backwards as forwards. Punctuation, case, and spaces between the words or lettering is allowed and does not affect whether the text or numbers is a palindrome. So here's some examples of palindromes. Mom is the same backwards or forwards. So is kayak. So is race car. The number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 reads the same forwards or backwards. Then we're going to have sentences. Now remember, we're going to eliminate any spaces, any punctuation. So was it a cat I saw? If you read it from the back end, from right to left, you will realize that it's the same. Same thing with the phrase, live on time, omit no evil. Or perhaps my favorite, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. So in our interface, we're going to have a text box the user enters the phrase or sentence or number into, and then a button that will test whether that's a palindrome or not and display the feedback, yes or no. Yes, it's a palindrome. No, it's not a palindrome, in a label below the button, where it currently says feedback will show up here. So if I click this one and say, is this a palindrome? As we already saw, was it a cat I saw should be considered a palindrome. And I'm told, yes, it's a palindrome. If I try mom, yes, that's a palindrome. Dad would be a palindrome. Father, though, would not be. It's not the same backwards or forwards. So how do we program this button? What's our algorithm? Here is the pseudocode for what we're going to do to make this button work and to test whether this is a palindrome or not. So the first step is we're simply going to get the input in this text box from the user, and we're going to put it into a variable called original. Then we're going to use the toLower method to modify that text in the variable original to all lowercase letters. In fact, we could actually do those two steps with the same line of code. We could also use toUpper if we wanted. I'm going to choose to use toLower. Then we want to remove all the spaces and any punctuation. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a loop that looks at each letter of a sentence or a phrase and determines if that particular letter is an A through Z value or a 0 through 9 value. If it is, we're going to copy it to another variable called revised. And I can use a for loop to do this because I'm going to know what the length of the original variable is, because we can use the .length property since it's a string. So once we've removed all the characters except for A through Z or 0 through 9, then I want to reverse those. And I'm going to use another loop to do that, in which each time through the loop I'm going to add one character to another variable called reversed, and we'll simply add it to the beginning of reversed rather than the end of reversed, and that will create our phrase from revised in reversed fashion. So now I have two variables, revised and reversed. Those maybe aren't the best names, they can get a little confusing, but then I simply want to compare the equality of revised versus reversed. And if they're the same, then we'll provide the feedback that yes, this is a palindrome, but if they're not the same, this can change the feedback to no, this is not a palindrome. I also color coded the feedback so it was green if it was a palindrome and red if it's not. So that's how we're going to approach this. Let's jump over to Visual Studio. I've already created the interface just to save some time. I have a label here where the auto size property is set to false. It allows me to stretch it out and have text wrap around. So here's the text I put in. It just explains what a palindrome is and how it doesn't involve the punctuation, the case, or the spaces. I have another label. It's just there to provide some information about the text box below it. So instructions to the user to enter word, phrase, or sentence or number to test. Then we have a text box. And I named this text box txt input. By default, I put in a palindrome phrase to test, which is, was it a cat I saw? So txt input is the name of that text box. Button named btn test. And the text here is this a palindrome? And then our third object that's named is another label, LBL feedback. I centered the text here, stretched it out a little bit, again set the auto size property to false. And the initial text is feedback will show up here, and I gave it a gray color. So that is the interface. I'm going to drag my properties back over and dock that. And let's code this button. So this is the button that will test this phrase or this number or word to see if it's a palindrome and provide the feedback in the label below. So I'm going to double click on btn test. That's going to generate in the code my private void btn test underscore click event procedure, and we have object sender comma event args as the parameters. That's all very standard. We're going to start by creating some variables. So I want a string variable that's going to be original, another one for revised. That's going to be the one. The original is going to contain the text as taken from our text box. Revised will be that text with all the spaces and punctuation removed. And then I want another one called reverse, which will be that revised phrase but in reversed order. Let's set original to our txt input text box dot text. Since that is a string value, I can use string methods. So I can take that text and convert it to all lowercase using the toLower method. So those were the first two steps that we saw in that pseudocode algorithm to get the code and set it to all lowercase. Again, I could have used to upper here. Then I'm going to create a for loop. We'll use a variable counter of I. I is going to equal 0. Our condition here in the for loop is I is less than original dot length. Length returns how many characters there are in that phrase. And then we're going to increment I by 1 each time through our loop. I'm going to put a comment that this is going to remove all punctuation, spaces, and special characters. Okay. It's basically going to leave any characters that are A through Z or 0 through 9. So I'm going to create another variable here called letter, which is going to be a string value. And it's simply going to equal original dot substring being a method of the string class. I'm going to correct original there. And remember, a substring can take two parameters. Where we want to start as far as the location, where we want to start is I, and the number of characters is the second parameter. That's going to be a 1. So I'm just going to get one character. And substring should be a lowercase s. And then we'll do an if statement. If String.Compare and what I'm going to compare is letter and A. So if those are the same, it's going to give me a 0, but if letter is smaller, give me a minus value. And if its letter is greater than A, it would give me a positive value. So we can say here is greater than or equal to 0. So it's either A or something higher than A, such as A through Z. We've stripped everything else out after Z, so Z would be the greatest value there. If that's the case, and String.Compare. We'll look at the value of letter again. And so I'm going to compare it with a lowercase z. And if that is less than or equal to 0, then we know we have a character that falls between A and Z inclusive. So we used a logical operator of the AND. Both of these have to be true, so it has to be equal to or greater than A and has to be less than or equal to Z. That's going to give us a character. And if that's the case, then I'm going to take revised and I'm going to increment revised by the value of letter. Now before I do that, I probably should come up here and add that revised equals quote quote. It's a null string. I'm going to do the same thing with reversed. We will use that here in a few minutes. Set that equal to a null string. Each time through the loop, if the character is A through Z, it's going to add the letter to revised. Now we also want to check for numbers, because we can have a numeric value that could be a palindrome. I could create a much longer conditional Boolean expression here using an OR and comparing the letter to 0 and 9. But I think this might be easier to copy this, paste it. Let's just make this a 0, and we'll set the Z equal to 9. And now it's going to catch any number. If it's a number, it doesn't get caught here, but it does get caught here. So it's only going to do one of these two. And in most cases, if it's punctuation or spaces, it's going to not do either of these. Both of these ifs would be false. Okay, so that gets us our revised value. And then we're going to take the value revised, use a for loop. And again, I'll use int I equals 0. I is less than revised dot length. And we want to increment I by 1 each time, so I plus plus. Add in our curly brackets. And all we're going to do here is say reversed plus equals revised dot substring I comma 1 for each letter at a time. And we want to put that now, each letter before the previous letters. So we want to add revised here, add reversed here at the end. So I don't want to use the plus equals, I just want to say reversed equal revised dot substring I comma 1 plus reverse. And I need my semicolon at the end. And now we have those two, that string reversed. We have revised as the modified original string, reversed as revised in opposite order, and then we can just simply compare if these are the same or not. So we use another if statement. If String.Compare, and what we're comparing here is revised and reversed. And if they're the same, it will equal 0. So we can say equals 0. That's our Boolean expression. If that's true, then our LBL feedback will say yes. I'm going to capitalize yes to make it stand out. This a palindrome. And I'm going to take LBL feedback dot for color, the color of the text. We'll set it equal to color dot red. Now, if it's not equal, I want to have an else fork. We'll specify else. And I'm just simply going to copy these two lines and paste. We'll change the text to say no. This is not a palindrome, and we'll change the color here to lime green. Kind of a bright green will stand out. So there's my code. I have 0 errors. There's no squigglies anywhere. We'll see if this actually works. Let's run it. So I'll test the default. Was it a cat I saw? Yes, that's a palindrome. Mad is not a palindrome, but madam is a palindrome. And of course, it doesn't matter whether these are uppercase or lowercase. Kayak is a palindrome. Now, I actually got the colors reversed here because I really wanted green for if it was correct and red if it's not. Red sort of indicating stop. So let's just go back and change those two colors here. This should be lime green, and this one should be red. And now the yes is in green, and the no is not a palindrome in red. That's our project, and there is the code for that button in its entirety.